Welcome back to RT International. Vladimir Putin is readying for a new war ahead of the 2018 general election in Russia. That's according to a US-based think tank called the Atlantic Council. Think tanks often help shape government policies, and due to the academic nature of them, they tend to be trusted more than other organizations. But should that be the case? RT's Caleb Maupin investigates.
Think tanks. They present themselves as universities without students, organizations conducting independent research to inform government policy. Of course, they love their sponsors and depend on them. And it turns out they work very hard to please them. U.S. federal law forbids working with foreign governments to lobby officials and influence policy. People have even gone to prison for it. Yet the Center for Global Development and the Brookings Institute have been getting money from and doing favors for foreign entities as they advise federal officials.
Brookings, for many decades, relied exclusively on endowment money to finance these activities. Analysis very often also contained recommendations, and those recommendations would have a political resonance.
According to the latest New York Times investigation, Lockheed Martin and Boeing, two top Pentagon contractors, have contracted over $77 million to various think tanks, and it wasn't an altruistic contribution. In return, major U.S. think tanks have come out strongly in favor of exporting weapons around the world, i.e., selling their products.
It can skew the analyses. It can skew the recommendations. In other words, you are buying the imprimatur, and since it wasn't known that it was being paid for, then the people in Congress or even the executive would credit it with an independence and intellectual authority, which in fact it didn't deserve.
A document from the Norwegian Foreign Ministry states that since it's so hard to access Washington heavyweights directly, sponsoring think tanks is often the only way for a foreign government to get its message across. Norway is not alone. The United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and many other countries are purchasing favors from DC's powerful think tanks. The Brookings Institute alone got $14.8 million in cash injected from Doha in 2013.
I think the best example is the Brookings Institution's Middle East policy work, which is, of course, now under the rubric of the Haim Saban Middle East Policy Center. There's a good reason for that. He gives the money to them. That has shaped their every product on the Middle East for the past several years. The history of this, of course, is that once the Cold War was over, those people in the Defense Department who had depended on the Soviet Union as the main threat to justify huge Cold War military budgets were in trouble. And of course they had to come up with Iraq and Iran to try to fill the gap, but that didn't really do it. And that has been the basis for getting the think tanks through obviously the money coming from military contractors to push this idea of Russia as a threat. And it's all one system, and it has worked very well for them.
Next time you hear a politician basing a policy decision on a think tank report, it's worth following the money trail. Caleb Maupin, RT, Washington, D.C.
The Syrian city of Aleppo has reportedly seen over 100 civilian deaths due to increased shelling since the start of August. Our Middle East correspondent Paula Sleer has more on the lethal developments.
The situation inside the northern divided Syrian city of Aleppo remains dire indeed. The humanitarian situation, in fact, has worsened since the start of this month. There is intensive fighting in the divided city, particularly in the eastern districts, where Syrian soldiers, assisted by local militia, have surrounded large groups of militants. Now, all of this comes as Russia has set up at least 7 round-the-clock humanitarian corridors. These are being used to provide sugar, rice, and water to the local population, and at the same time to provide civilians as well as rebels who have laid down their arms with the opportunity to move to a safe passage. We've been talking to locals who have been caught up in this latest bombardment, and all of them confirm just how dire the situation there is.
I'm 17. I've just graduated from the 11th grade. I was sleeping at home, and when I woke up, I realized I was covered in blood. But I didn't realize what was going on. They told me later it was shelling from terrorists. My father and brothers were also wounded.
When the shelling happened, I was lucky to not be at work. If I had been, I would have died. The shelling has completely destroyed my kiosk, but I want to get back to work in a couple of days. I still need to provide for my family.
This comes parallel to a report that has been issued by the Russian Defense Ministry that says the Jabhat Fatah al-Sham group, which was formerly the al-Nusra Front, has executed some 40 rebels and their families as they try to surrender and use one of these humanitarian corridors to gain safe passage to one of the areas that is controlled by government troops. As of yet, we haven't been able to independently verify this report or the claims inside it.
That was RT's Paul Asleer speaking about Aleppo. Meanwhile, in northern Syria, Kurdish forces backed by the US-led coalition have finally managed to take over the city of Manbij after months of heavy fighting with Islamic State militants. RT Arabic correspondent Mohammed Hassan is there bringing us the latest updates from the former ISIL stronghold.
بعد أكثر من شهرين ونصف من المواجهات العسكرية بين قوات سوريا الديمقراطية ومسلحي داعش، تمكنت سوريا الديمقراطية وبدعم من التحالف الدولي من السيطرة بشكل كامل على مدينة منبج.
It was complicated for us to save civilians from the areas held by terrorists, but we did it. Terrorists are now fleeing, but we will go after them no matter where they are heading to. We won't let them stay in our lands. We will bring about safety again.
Well, parts of the mainstream media claim a lack of trust on the ground is preventing any kind of ceasefire holding in Syria.
There is no trust. No trust in the Assad regime, no trust in ceasefires or cessation of hostilities or humanitarian corridors, no trust in the Russians, and no trust in you, by the way, in us, in the international community, who have been wringing their hands on the sidelines while hospitals and bakeries and schools have been bombed.
Context of the siege, effectively, of Manbij, which Islamic State holds, there has been twice as many, almost twice as many civilians killed, proportionately to combatants killed, which indicates a slight loosening, perhaps, of the guidelines which the US authorities are putting in place there.